Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of BIM Pure Live. I am your host, Nicolas Catelier. I am an architect, a BIM specialist, and the founder of BIM Pure. We've got a great episode for you today. If you're watching live today, October 9, 2024, you can tell us in the chat where you are watching from. And we'll move on with today's event sponsor, and it is Guardian, a plugin for Revit that helps you maintain and manage your standards and enforce them and help the users. And each week we're exploring a different feature. This week it is the Project Central. This is a menu that can be used by the admins to see what's going on. The first feature is Sync Traffic Control, which allows you to remind users to sync to Central if they forgot to do so. The next one is Messages. You can send messages to your entire team. They will see it directly in Revit, and you can see all list of messages you've sent. There's also Project at a Glance. So this is to help you keep track of everything going wrong inside of your projects. For example, groups without names, things like that, and rename them directly. Users at a glance, you can see a list of all users that have worked in this project in the last few weeks or even months. You can see the comments that they've used. You can see a list of Revit warnings that have been caused by these users, along with a screenshot. You can filter out in the last 7 days or the past month, in the past 3 months, or more than that. And then you have the timeline. This is to keep track of everything going on inside of your project. You can track specific information such as the file size. You can see the project sessions, so how many times the Revit model has been opened by different user. You can see how much time it takes to open a model, how much time it takes to sync to Central. You can see how many warnings have been created by different users. You can filter by to have 7 days or months. And then there's the activity feed. So in a previous tip of the week, we saw that you can track or prevent certain commands. With the Project Central, you can have a list of all of these specific commands by the users when they've been used. You have the full list, you have the screenshot of when that happened, before and after. So this way you can communicate with the user and see what's going on inside of your model. So that is Guardian for Revit, a great plugin to help you manage your standard. And that is just one of the multiple features that's included in this tool. Let me move on here. So yeah, to learn more, go at getguardian.tech. And I'm thrilled that they're sponsoring this season of BIM Pure Live. I've actually approached them myself because I love the tool and I'm very picky when it comes to a sponsor. So thank you, Guardian, for sponsoring this event. Okay, next thing I wanted to talk about, it is the live masterclasses. So we're doing these live events on YouTube. It's a lot of fun. But we also have on the BIM Pure membership lots of upcoming live events that are only for members. So these tends to be a bit more intimate. Less people, but it allows to have more interaction with the audience. And we have 4 planned events. The next one is going to be October 28th, and it's about keeping healthy Revit models. It's going to be by myself. After that, we have Eric Fritz, with whom we've recently done a mini course about the Revit API. He's going to be joining us late November. And just going to chat about PyRevit and Python. It's going to be a Q&A type session. Then I've had requests from BIM Pure members to have a session about Autodesk Bridge in ACC, which is a tool that lets you link multiple Revit models from one ACC project to another, which allows you to keep control over your own models and files. Then the content catalog. Recently, Autodesk has launched Content Catalog, which they've acquired this company, Unify. They've rebranded to Content Catalog, and now it's included for everyone with Autodesk Docs. And I wrote an article about it last month, but I wanted to have someone, an expert that has been using Unify for years and now Content Catalog, to show us tips how to organize the file and so on. So that's Rolly Stevens of Ryan Companies, and that session is going to be in January 20th. So lots of upcoming live masterclasses. Check the link in the video description if you want to see a list of all events, and that's included in the BIM Pure membership, which includes lots of stuff. Not going to go through it all, but you can also watch not only live but all the replays. You can see a sample of previous episode that we've had in the past. They're all there. You can watch the replay to all of them. And yeah, final thing, I'm going to next week, no episode. I'm going to Autodesk University. So yeah, are you going to AU? So if you're watching live and going to AU, let us know in the chat. I see a few names already that I know are going to be there. Yeah, as usual, we've got people from all over the place. Pretty excited about it. Okay, so let's bring today's guest, which is Michael Kilkelly. It's the second time on the show. He's the founder of Archsmarter. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm good, Nicholas. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. So as we've been chatting before the show started, it's been a while. It's been 3 years, isn't it? More than 3
It
years, in fact.
has. Yeah. So when I was on last, we were talking about Revit add-ins, getting started with, C# and the Revit API. And since then, AI has all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
come up, and it was like, oh, be interesting to look at it, same topic, but through that lens of the, AI and what can AI do for us?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot
Yeah,
to talk about. So
sure. Yeah, and something interesting is that our first episode, it was quite a niche topic at first, and I think it was one of the most slow burn episode. The views kept climbing year after year, right? So typically you saw a burst of people interest when after the episode, but yours it was kind of slowly by slowly. It seems there's more and more interest in the Revit API. So that's something I've gathered from checking the stats of the live events.
yeah, that's interesting. Yep. Cool.
And yeah, so last time you gave us just general tips and your approach to Revit add-ins, and as you said, AI came along. So you're gonna talk about it, but how did it affect your way to approach this? It's a pretty broad question. I'm sure we're going to discuss it, right?
Yeah, we're going to get into it. And I mean, AI is such a broad topic, but we're going to focus in specifically on add-ins and where are areas where you can use it. What are some trends that I've seen, particularly with tool creation within AEC, and how AI comes into it. So
All right.
it's gonna be good.
Why don't we get started?
Let's get
All
started.
right. Let's do it.
All right. Let me see. So a little bit about me. Again, I am Michael Kilkelly. I am the founder of Archsmarter, and I've been in the industry, I had to do the math, 30 years, which is kind of a big, scary number. And it's kind of been split, my career. So I spent sort of the first 15 or so years as an architect, and I most recently, probably my last real architecture job, I spent 7 years working for Frank Gehry. And that actually overlaps with the next 15 years of my career. And that's really been as a coder. So I was at Gehry Partners. I left there in 2012 and I moved back to the East Coast where I live right now in Connecticut. And that's when I founded Archsmarter and I started doing kind of automation consultant work, a lot of that work for Gehry Partners. And then I started doing, bringing on some other clients, doing courses and things. So currently right now, I actually not doing consulting. I work for IMEG, which is a large engineering company here in the US. We've got about 60 or so offices, and I work within the automation team. So I'm, developing tools, developing workflows, getting to try out a lot of new technology, which has been really fun. And I also too still teach through Archsmarter, and kind of my main course offering right now is a program I call Revit Add-in Academy, and I also have a Revit Add-in Bootcamp, which is for kind of people beginning their coding journey. So that is.
I saw, sorry to interrupt, but I saw you kind of streamline your approach a little bit. You used to have lots of different courses and bundles, and now it's just the cohort, isn't it?
It's pretty much it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, it runs, the bootcamp is kind of the introduction to Revit Add-in programming, and then there's kind of a follow-up advanced course within the academy. But yeah, that's for the most part, that's it. Took me a while to get around.
Do you like it this way when it's kind of simplified? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Because I mean, any kind of programming, it's sort of like a really deep lake. Like, there's there's always more. You can always dive deeper.
Yeah.
And I find just with my sort of, in my day job, I'm always learning new stuff. There's new technology, there's new things. And, we're going to talk about that, a lot of that today. So yeah, that was Okay. Couple quick questions though before we get started. In the chat, I'm curious how many of you are using some sort of AI tool, and that could be, ChatGPT or some AI enhanced tools. I'm interested to hear. For those of you that do use them, how often? Are you a daily user or
Uh,
not?
let me run the
Yeah,
poll.
please.
I've actually just run a poll to see if people
Oh,
are
excellent.
attending Autodesk University.
Mhm.
And we have 31% saying yes. So I'll do
Oh,
another
wow.
poll to see if
Yeah,
people are using AI. And so is it specifically about Revit add-ins or just generally
just
in?
in general.
Mm.
Yeah. Yep. And also too, I'm interested to hear what specific tools people are using. And if you follow along, like there's so much sort of effort and energy right now in AI because that's it's kind of a hot new thing. But it also, in a lot of ways, I know it was for me when ChatGPT came out. It was like AI had been this thing that was talked about, but I never figured it would actually come out or amount to anything or be something that I would use. And then all of a sudden, you have ChatGPT. And I remember when I heard about it, I was like, take my money, please. Like I signed up as soon as I could and then started using it. And we're starting to, see some differentiation and variation. And there's other products that are coming out. I'm a big fan now of Claude. So Claude is a LLM similar to ChatGPT with the different interface. And I'll show that as well.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I've never
Oh,
had time to test it. So
all
curious
right,
to
we'll look at
see
it today.
about it.
But there's a whole lot of innovation going on. So it's exciting, and I'm always like, oh, what are you using? What do you have? Just to see what other people are doing. So, anyways, love to hear what you're looking at, what you're using as far as AI goes. So we'll let that happen in the chat. Now, let's talk a little bit about, why you would want to use AI. If maybe you've dabbled with it, you're not quite sure. For me, the big thing is AI is a tool that we can use to enhance, our own capabilities. It's not going to replace us, at least not yet. I always think, anything regarding AI, I say like, oh, it won't replace us, in 5 years. And I'm like, no, let's cut that back. Like things are happening very fast, but I think we're safe. We're not going to get replaced yet. It's a great tool to increase your productivity. And this is, let me zoom in here, an article that was put out by the MIT Sloan School of Business, and that AI has been like they did a meta study and they looked at a whole bunch of productivity studies, but it can make you 40% more productive. Now, the caveat here, of course, is if you're using it correctly. And we'll talk a bit about what does it mean to use it correctly. But if you think about that, 40%, that's pretty good. That's a big number as far as being able to accomplish more, or conversely, being able to actually work less than we normally did. So as a productivity tool, it's great. And also, if you think about things you don't like to do, within reason, there's usually an AI tool that can do that for you. I know a lot of times, if I have to do writing, there's certain things that might be a roadblock, looking at the blank page. AI is great for that, for generating that first draft that then you can go and edit and evolve. Now, another thought, so when I graduated architecture school, this was back in 1995, we were still doing hand drafting. We were doing hand models. It was very much sort of a creating with our hands. And then around that time, when I had my first job, that I started using AutoCAD, and it's been all digital since then. And at the time, there was a lot of like, firms thinking we want to be digital first. We're going to do all of our production. We're going to save a lot of time. Everything's going to be digital. At this point, now we're really looking at, people are digital natives. My kids have always had some sort of device. They've always used, they can't type, but they can sure use an iPad like nobody's business. But I think what we're moving into now is really more AI first and AI native. So who is using the tools, who is being quick to adopt them into their processes, into their daily, their daily workflows. And then that's going to transition into AI native. And we're starting to see companies that are really relying more so in the tech industry, but I think it was the company Klarna is a big kind of financial services and loan company. They've actually started insourcing a lot of their development. Like they're not using Salesforce, they're not using some of those other typical SaaS software because they're actually just going to build their own, and they're leveraging AI to be able to do that. So they're bringing a lot of that in-house. Because AI is so much more efficient, particularly when it comes to software and coding. So that's something.
Do you think
oh yeah, go ahead.
you think it's going to make that more people are going to build their own tools, maybe internally instead of outsourcing or using?
It makes it a lot
solutions.
easier. And I will talk. I mean, there are still prerequisites. So, but there's some interesting stuff, what I call meta tools, that are coming out that are sort of building tools for you, and you don't even have to code them at all. So that's a whole another interesting kind of thing that AI has opened up.
Yeah, and we've got some answer to
Oh yeah,
the question, the poll. I was saying, are you using AI in your AC BIM practice? 56% yes, no 43%, and the answer mostly ChatGPT. We've got some Veras in there, a few people Midjourney, and a few rare people are saying Claude Sonnet as well.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. Yeah, it's good mix. At least there's awareness of, you can't not be aware of AI at this point, really. So hopefully we'll take that a little bit deeper today. So I think the important thing here, AI is not going to take your job, and you hear this quote quite a bit, but somebody who's using AI could, and that really goes back to that productivity factor. Like, this is a tool, it's really, it's sort of open-ended. You can use it in a lot of different ways, but it is important to sort of experiment and get comfortable using it because of that productivity boost. So, don't be afraid to dive in there and really just see what it can do for you. Again, because people are really starting to develop some significant chops. They are becoming those AI first, those AI native people, and they have leveraged the technology to make them that much more productive. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what sort of things is AI good for, and we're just going to sort of highlight this, but really writing and content creation. I don't know, Nick, if you do this at all, but it's great for first drafts. I need a draft about this, or, I need a script for a video. And then it's not going to be perfect. And you can actually tell, and I've gotten pretty good at spotting AI generated content. And it's
on
like,
LinkedIn, there's
really
a lot of it, right?
Terrible. Yeah. It's really bad. But if you take it and use it, as a decent outline and then start to add, your things. I've always found with writing anyways, it's easier to edit than it is to kind of start from scratch. And it's a lot faster. So you can get that first draft.
Yeah, I found that with writing, I don't use it that much anymore because to me, the way I see writing, it's a way to help me think as well. It's like I have to organize my thinking.
Yeah.
So if I go too fast to AI, I feel that it loses that part where it helps clarify exactly what's in my head. So the way I use it these days for writing, maybe there's a sentence or a paragraph, I'm not that sure how to use it. So I might go to AI and ask, can you give me 5 different versions of this or that?
Right.
But I'm trying not to use it that much because I can spot on LinkedIn where in text is AI written. You're like, okay.
Oh, yeah. I would never say that. No human would ever say that.
And I saw somewhere that you can spot specific words that are AI uses a lot, like words like delve, for example.
Yeah. Or if I see that anywhere, I'm like, no, I don't think I've ever used that word.
Yeah, there's a few of them like, like not a lot of people use that, but AI love these words. But
it loves it.
Anyway, still helpful for some writing tasks.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Research is another great use case. And, again, there is the notion of AI can hallucinate. Like, we want to sort of trust but verify. And I think particularly with more recent versions of ChatGPT, Claude, and others, Gemini, they are starting to cite their sources, knowing that we want to backtrack and make sure, whatever sort of facts we think we're getting from AI, we can back that up with a source. AI is also great for idea generation, brainstorming, and I'll use that. Like, here's a thread of a thought. What can I do with this? And kind of that, it's almost like, a writing partner or an idea partner where you can bounce ideas off them. Predictive analytics and simulation as well, particularly if you have a lot of data. and that you can use, AI in sort of the general sense, machine learning and other things, to be able to sort of make some um, predictions or based off of that past data. And particularly if you have a lot of data, you can actually get some pretty good results. Again, that would need to be verified. And the last one, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, is just code generation and programming. And AI has gotten to be really good because there is a lot of data that's available. There's a lot of code out on the internet. So these models have been trained on all sorts of code. Now, there are some caveats in here as well. I have had instances where it will just make stuff up. As far as code goes, that doesn't exist, particularly with the Revit API. But I'll show you some ways that you can actually start to train it a little bit better. So those are the good things. Now, what's AI not good for? And I think this is good for us humans. AI is not great at original thinking. AI is not going to, Midjourney is not going to create the next Picasso, but it could give you a pretty good variation on the existing Picasso, but we're not going to see any much original thinking, at least not yet in the next 5 years or so. Complex decisions that are tough, particularly those that require some sort of judgment. AI is not, there's no conscience there. Those are things we want humans to evolve in. Same with emotions and tone, although this is really getting better. Looking at sort of computer vision that can start to read emotional states, which, gets a bit scary when you start thinking about the police state and, and Big Brother and stuff. That's kind of making a judgment based on what tone it thinks you're taking, in your body language and things. But
yeah, I did try that new advanced voice mode in the new ChatGPT. I don't know if you tried it, but
I haven't tried that.
It's a bit similar. Well, they say I haven't tried it that much, but a bit similar to the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know if you saw that one.
I have not, but I have heard about it. Yep. Yeah,
it can detect emotion in your voice and can adjust the tone of the voice accordingly and so on.
Now I know what I'm going to do after we wrap up here. I'm going to check it out. A couple other things. It's not great with understanding like long context over long periods. And if you've used ChatGPT, I'm sure you've experienced this where, it's like you're talking to like a, forgetful toddler and you're like, hey, I just told you this like a minute ago. And it's, oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I remember that now. And so if you're, doing a lot of back and forth, and it is going to forget stuff because it has limited capacity. And I think that will get better. But, it's not like picking up on a conversation you had with a good friend, from a few weeks ago, like, oh, okay, you can pick up right where you left off. It's not always that good. And then lastly, ambiguity. It does not deal with ambiguity all that well. Not that every human, deals with ambiguity all that well either, but certainly it is looking for facts. It's looking for things that are concrete, data-based, things that are sort of knowable by a machine. So we want to try to avoid using, and going back to that 40% increase in productivity, if we use AI in the right capacity, then we can realize that if we're starting to use things and look at it for some of these uses, it's not going to be as satisfying. All right, so now let's shift this. That was kind of big picture. Let's get into the future of AI as it applies to Revit and add-ins. And I mentioned this earlier, kind of themes that I'm starting to see. And there's kind of two major, branches, if you will. And that is using AI to make tools and how we can actually have AI as a partner in that tool creation process. And then we're also seeing AI being used to make tools better. So this is enhancing tools with AI sort of inside as part of the tool itself. So using AI to make tools, and we're going to look at this. I'm going to do a demo, Nick. We're going to make a BIM Pure toolbar in about 10 minutes. But there's a lot of options that we have if we are tool makers that we can enhance our own process doing that. And the sort of the obvious one is LLMs, so large language models. This would be ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. Again, they've been trained on, bazillion bits of data. A lot of it is code. So they have a very extensive understanding of how code works and how to put code together. I use, ChatGPT, more recently Claude, on a regular basis as I'm doing coding. And I can, if there's something I don't understand or I don't get it, it's, as good. And I'll use it in conjunction with Google trying to find actual code samples. So it's really, really good in that regard. Now, there are also a whole series of, I'm calling them IDE-based tools. So an IDE is an integrated development environment. This is basically a software that we use to create software. So this would be Visual Studio, it would be Visual Studio Code. It's kind of here, I have one up. I'll show you what it looks like if you've never seen it. This is Visual Studio right here. It's a code editor, essentially. So with there's a lot of tools that have been integrated into IDEs, most specifically, and probably most famously is GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot is actually, will start making some recommendations on code based on the code you've already typed. And it's surprisingly good. You're just like thinking, oh, okay, I need a method that's going to do this. And it will sort of ghost in what that method could be based on what you've just typed. And again, it's freakishly good. Although I think there has been some lawsuits potentially. It gets into whose code are you looking at, and is that code sort of copyrighted, or do I have some protections on that? So,
Have you heard of Cursor? It's a new one that
no. What's it called?
Cursor.
Cursor, no.
Yeah. I think it's a new tool that's emerged.
Okay. Yeah. No,
I haven't tried it. I've just saw it that it could be an alternative to Visual Studio Code.
Oh yeah. Okay. Cursor. I'll check it out. Another tool, Sorcery. This one's really interesting because it will look at your code on GitHub, and it will actually make recommendations. It will look at it and improvements that can sort of increase its reliability and things like that. And it runs on the back end, so it will test your code and then give you some suggestions to it. And there's a lot of effort, obviously, that's gone into this just because AI works really well with code. We have things like CodeSpell, Mutable AI, and these are their own sort of AI first IDEs. So they are built from the ground up, integrating AI. So a lot of interesting things happening. Now, I'm also starting to see this idea of a meta tool. And I don't know, have any of you looked at or tested BIM Logic's Copilot? This is super interesting. What it is it's a prompt it's an add-in for Revit, and it creates this prompt window. Inside the prompt window, you can just ask it what not even ask, tell it what you want it to do. Duplicate the floor plan 6 times, rename or find scope boxes, apply the scope boxes to those views. So it is a text, basically a chat prompt for Revit, but then it will create these sort of mini tools. So it is essentially it's an add-in that creates add-ins. And what it does is you put your prompt in there, it sends it up to the cloud. There's all sorts of kind of AI prompting that's happening, and it's creating code, and then it's compiling that code, and then it's sending down to your instance of Revit a DLL. So basically a finished add-in, and then it will run that add-in for you. And what's interesting, I don't know if I have it. I don't have it here, but you can actually. So you can see in this one where it says view name. Those are in the squirrely brackets. Those are actually intended to be a variable. So then it will prompt you when you run that tool. You can add these variables in there. So the next time you use it, you could change that variable. I want you to create 6 views, or I want you to create 10 views. So it's kind of building, pretty sophisticated little micro tools inside of Revit, all based off of a prompt. So super interesting there. And I think we'll see a lot more of that as we get more and more comfortable using sort of chat and, prompt-based interfaces. So that's basically about tool making and how we can sort of be more productive as tool makers. Now, we're also seeing, AI being integrated into tools. And I think this is definitely going to increase. BIM Logic also has a tool called Smart Annotation. And what this does is kind of solves the problem of, I have all of these tags, I have all these leaders, I have, everything in my drawing, it's a hot mess. It will actually take all of the coordinates from your tags, and then it will send them up to the cloud. It's going to use kind of AI and machine learning to find the optimum solution of where those tags should be located, sends those coordinates down, and then it places everything so that they don't actually overlap. And I'm simplifying it because there's a lot more that you can do, but it's leveraging AI to kind of solve that somewhat messy problem and it takes some time, but all that processing, rather than having to kind of write code to do all that, it's getting outsourced to probably an LLM or ChatGPT, because they all have APIs to do that. A few of you, I think, mentioned using Veris. That's a kind of a famous one, if you will. That was pretty wild when that came out. And again, using this, taking a screenshot of your Revit model, an image of it, sending it out to, I don't know what they use on the back end, if they're using Midjourney.
I think
You've talked with them.
Yeah, I've had a live session with them.
Yeah.
I think it's an open source model that they've used and modified for their needs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really wild though, that idea. Like, you can use it on images that are, that you're creating the outline of the image, the scaffolding, and then you're using AI to, give you some options there. That just kind of blew my mind. I thought that was really wild. They also have the Glyph tool, which is similar to the BIM Logic Copilot, but deals more so with annotation and annotation dimensions, tagging, that sort of thing. But also this kind of using a prompt-based interface for it. And then there are components, that there's computing that's happening in the cloud in a lot of cases to be able to do that quickly. So that's pretty wild. This is a tool. Oops, let me get rid of that. This is a tool that I'm working on at IMEG, and actually I'll be at AU next week as well, and I'm going to be presenting on this, just looking specifically at data. So this tool here it's a data browser, and this actually uses two APIs. So it's using the AEC data model API, which is an Autodesk API. What it allows you to do, this is just a standalone app. I can log in, and then I can select my ACC hub. And then from my ACC hub, I can select a project. Then from the project, I can get an actual Revit file that's part of that project. So these are models that are hosted on the cloud. From then, I can go ahead and I can choose categories, and then I can actually see an output of all of the properties of the elements of that category. So I'm reading that data from the cloud. I'm not actually opening up Revit to do that. And I can see, all of my models. So from here, I can start to I can get counts. I can start to look at that data in a lot of different ways, because I have complete access to it. So what I'm working on now, and I'm hoping to have it done for AU next week, is integrating the data that we're getting out of the AEC data model with ChatGPT. So I can take that output, and it comes out of the data model in a JSON format, which is kind of a structured data. I can send that to ChatGPT, and then I can actually use a chat prompt to be able to ask questions. So I could say, what is the largest wall on the 3rd floor? Or how many toilets are there in the 7th floor? Or what is the window area, in my entire building? So I can use that chat prompt. It's all data and it's structured. So I can use the power of an LLM in this tool. So it's not just about being able to look at counts, but I can actually go through and then ask it questions. So
is that a private plugin for a specific company?
It's not even it's a standalone app. At some point, this is a kind of an research that we're doing in-house at IMEG, just looking at specifically at model data. And then, once you get into the model data, well, it's like, oh, can we just feed this into an LLM and, start asking it questions? So it's been really interesting. And I'll talk more about some of these APIs, because that's another thing that I'm noticing as well, as far as software, how software works. In fact, how did I missed over that? Oh, actually, let me jump back for 1 second. So one thing that I am seeing as well, and this is within the industry as a whole, is just this blurring line. So we have tool users and tool creators. And I think we've seen this with Dynamo. It's like creating tools that make it easier for people to create tools. And I like to use this, what I call the alarm clock analogy. So if we look at software, in the past, kind of near present, the alarm clocks, we'd go to the store, we'd buy an alarm clock. It's a packaged artifact, right? It has nice soft edges. It looks good. It has a user interface. It tells the time. Maybe it has an alarm. It is a finished product. So if we look at Revit, Revit as an analogy to the alarm clock, Revit came out in 2000, and the originators of Revit didn't want to have an API at all. They're like, why should we
Really?
let
Why?
other people, why should I let civilians,
Wow.
build off of my tools? And I think that was the mindset back then. Like, I'm going to deliver, I am the expert. I'm going to create the software that you need. I know what you need. Here you go. So it wasn't until 2005 that they actually released, and that was after, Autodesk had acquired Revit.
Yeah.
And
Can you imagine Revit without an API? That would be
well, I
crazy.
mean, there would be no Dynamo. There would be no, like, think of
Yeah.
all the things
Yeah.
that there wouldn't be. And then it puts a lot of the emphasis too on Autodesk to create all of those tools to, to feed all the special interests and different niches and things. So, I mean, that's really, I think we've moved past that. Now an API is kind of essential. So if we look at present, our software looks a little bit more like this. So it's still an alarm clock, but I have some connectors hanging out here. Maybe there's some pieces that aren't quite as finished. And if I wanted to solder on some other new features, I could kind of do that for the most part. And that's where, we have software that comes with APIs. So there are parts of it that are exposed. Now, where I think we're moving very quickly is something like this, that software is really not going to be software as we know it. Instead, it's going to be this kit of parts, and that we're going to be able to assemble the tools we need. And there may be some sort of, features in there that we know and need, but there's going to be things that we can make other tools from. And this is really much more of an API first sort of approach. So API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it allows us to basically, write code on top of existing software. If you look at Autodesk Platform Services, so you may not be familiar with this, but Autodesk is creating all of these APIs in addition to the software that they regularly come out with. So this is from and this used to be called Forge. It's gone through a whole bunch of different transformations, but this is a list of all the APIs that are available right now. So that tool that I showed you, that Data Explorer, uses this one here, this AEC data model. And there's a lot of APIs, and they're actually adding to this. And this really is kind of a shift in the business model. So instead of selling you a subscription to software, this is all about use. So every time, they haven't started charging for the data model yet, but it will, like, as it evolves. I know some of these APIs are charged. So every time you make a request, I think it's design automation is one of them. So you can automate against models that are in the cloud. There is a charge for each time you run that request. So it's kind of like it's a great big giant piggy bank that keeps going. Like, the more you use it, the more it's going to cost you. And this is the same as well with a lot of APIs. Same, ChatGPT has an API.
And
It's
does
going
it
to charge
mean
you.
that if, yeah, I've heard of it, that they're charging for this API. Does it
Yeah,
mean that it doesn't make sense to have a free tool, for example, or release a free
it would
tool
not
because
make
it costs
sense
them
to me.
something?
Yeah,
Yeah, I see.
absolutely. Because you're going to pay. So,
Yeah,
like,
that's
the
right.
way it works is you buy tokens. You, as the developer, you buy tokens, and then as your tool gets used, you get charged for the tokens. And then obviously, you would want to charge somebody else plus a little profit or something to be able to use the tool, because you're getting charged.
So,
Yeah,
so for that, that's for the cloud apps. Doesn't
that
yet
is for
apply to Revit API, but who knows in the future,
correct. Yeah,
right?
exactly. And it depends. Yeah, I think once you start getting things into the cloud, that's where this kind of model, seems to come up. You're going to get, there are these, and there, it's not a lot. You don't get charged a lot. The
Hmm.
testing I've been doing using the OpenAI / ChatGPT API, I'm not doing a whole lot of volume at this point, so I'm getting charged a couple cents every request I make. But you can imagine, you have 10, 15, 100, 200, 300 people using a tool, making all these requests. You're getting charged a little bit, but it adds up after a while. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting piece to it right there. So this comes into too, we're talking about AI, do I need to know how to program, right? So you're thinking, well, can I just use ChatGPT? I'm going to ask it to give me some code. Like, I don't need to know how to program, right? And it's like, nah, not exactly. And what I think learning to code is a lot like learning to drive. So like my son, my middle son, he's getting to that age. He's, going to be able to get his learning permit in a little bit. So, we don't have, you can imagine like if we have smart cars that can drive themselves, I'd still want him to know how to drive. Like we're not quite at that autopilot part yet with our cars. We're certainly not there with coding, but you need to know how the car works. You need to know the rules of the road, how to change a tire, like what to do when things go wrong. Like there's a lot of knowledge you need to know before as you start learning to drive. The same thing is true with coding. Like there's a lot to know. You can't just ask ChatGPT to, hey, make me a Revit add-in that does this, this, this. You need to have an understanding about syntax and data types. How does a program flow? How are conditional statements work? What is the Revit API? How does that function? And then even specifically with add-ins, how do add-ins interact with Revit? Where do they get loaded from? What are the different sort of files that I need to create in order for them to get loaded? And then, user experience. What is the user going to do? So there are some prerequisites really that come with that. So in the end, like AI isn't going to replace coding skills. It's going to amplify them. So like I said, we're going to jump in real quick and we're going to make an add-in, in about 10 or 15 minutes, but that's all going to be built on, there are some prerequisites. So there are things that we do need to know. So, AI doesn't solve that problem. You still have to have that sort of base level of knowledge. So let's switch on over and put it to the test. So you'll see though, you can, when you have that base knowledge, you can use AI to create tools really fast. So the way we're going to do this is let me switch over into Visual Studio. So I have a project that's set up here for this demo. And again, I'm in Visual Studio. I'm using a template that I created for the Revit Add-in Academy that has some like boilerplate code. But what really we're going to be putting our code in right here. So these are called command files.
So just sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure if you mentioned it. I know you mentioned last time we did have a discussion about it, but about what language are you using? So you're using C#, right?
This is C#. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts about it. I kind of know the pros and cons personally, but if you had to, some people like to use Python along with PyRevit and maybe the what's it called, the shell, the Python shell.
Yep.
Yeah. But C# is more proper for an actual add-in that you can install, right? So can you share some thoughts on why you're using C#?
So C# is, and I've been through different variations of programming language, and I like C#. So Revit add-ins they're built using .NET languages, which is going to be C# or it's going to be VB.NET. But for the most part, people are using C#. Now, something like PyRevit is actually built using C#, but it has Python interpreters built into it. So it is able to read Python, and then it does some internal conversions, and it will make that conversion into the common runtime language that Revit uses to actually run the add-in. So there is things that are happening behind the scenes in PyRevit, but it is ultimately converting that into C# and then running it. So I think there's a lot of the good thing is there's so many different ways that we can automate Revit. So you can do Dynamo, you can do Python inside of Dynamo. You have the Python command line, PyRevit, Revit add-ins. I think for me, maybe I'm a bit of a purist, but I can get right in there. I don't have to install PyRevit first. I can just build my add-in directly, and then we're going to make its own ribbon. We're going to have individual tools for it, and you'll see it's kind of a smaller package, but there is a steeper learning curve to kind of get to this point. So that is the trade-off. If you've looked at, I've gone through PyRevit, a lot of the it's all open source, so you can look at a lot of the code that's there, and that is a complicated piece of software. And I think it's great because it gives you infrastructure that you can build other tools into. But that piece of infrastructure in order to do it is big and complex. And so you lose a little bit of control with that because, you're relying on, you have this other piece of software so that you can then build your software. With C#, I can, I'm just relying on Revit, the Revit API, and then my code. So it's a steeper learning curve, kind of slimmer package, I guess, is the way to say it.
All right, and
So
if you're new to C sharp, I remember last time we've talked about the ways to learn it. I think you recommended a book, so I recommend people check the link in the description. You can watch the session we did together
oh
2 years ago,
yeah,
where Michael explains the basics of C sharp and how to get started.
yeah, yep. And I'll go through it, very
Okay,
quickly
okay.
here. But essentially this in Visual Studio, this is a kind of my setup for a Revit add-in. And I have a series, you can see command 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. And then I have an app file, and then I have this add-in file. So the add-in file is actually what Revit loads. So when I launch Revit, it's going to look for this add-in file, and it's going to tell it, here's my DLL. So what happens when I build the code, which we'll do, it basically compiles my code into a DLL file, and then it copies it, to the right places inside of Revit. So when Revit launches, it looks for all of these .addin files in certain set locations, and then that tells it, oh, okay, here's an add-in, I'm going to load it now. So this is important because it's kind of like the connector. It connects Revit to my DLL. Now, all my command files, this is where we're going to put our code. And then finally, we have our app file. And this is basically what's going to build out our ribbon. So when Revit launches, it's going to get my .addin file. The add-in file is going to load this app file. And then this app file is connecting. It's basically creating my buttons. It's linking them to these command files, and then it's going to link them to a button. So we're going to create a ribbon, which we'll call it BIM Pure Tools. And inside of that, we're going to have a panel that's going to say text tools. So we're going to create a series of text tools. And then I have my individual buttons. So I have a button here, command 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, you can see I didn't, I got to fix that. I have 5 buttons. There we go. So here are my 5 buttons right here. And then I'm going to, I'm creating sort of data specific for the buttons that has the, the name of it and the image. And then I actually create the buttons themselves. So this is kind of, again, boilerplate code that I have as part of this template. So it makes it really easy to get started. All I have to do is, kind of drop my code in here. And then I have a lot of the infrastructure is built and ready to go. What is also good about this template is I can choose to build this to any version of Revit that I want. So I have this set up. It'll build to Revit 2020 all the way up to 2025. And then there's 2 modes. I can do a debug mode or a release mode. And it's just that it's differentiated based on like release mode is really optimized to run a little bit faster. So when, I'm ready to go, I can choose that version of Revit that I want. And I'll just go ahead and I'm going to build this right now. There's no code in it yet, but I click this build button. It's actually compiling all of the code right now. It's going to package that up into a DLL file. And then it's going to, as part of that, it's going to copy that DLL file into the location that Revit's looking for. And it's also simultaneously, because I'm running it in debug, it's actually opening up Revit in the background. So the downside is it takes a little bit of time for it to actually, get Revit up and running. That's probably a benefit with Revit when you're doing development inside of that, is that you don't have to restart Revit every time. So this is going to go. But while we're doing that, what we're going to get set up to do is actually create some tools. So I'm going to go ahead and let me pull up here. So I like using Claude. That's kind of the LLM that I've been using most recently. And I've used ChatGPT. And again, I like Claude because it has some features that I think are really helpful. But in both ChatGPT and Claude, they have, ways that you can actually sort of constrain what you're looking on. So ChatGPT has custom GPTs. Claude has what are called projects. So I have a project here, which is called Revit API. And what's really good about it is that I can actually set this up with project knowledge. So I have a library of code that I've written over the years. This is it right here in GitHub. So I have hundreds of methods that I've written in C# over the years. So I can load these up into Claude. So this is actually the knowledge that it's going to be working on. So now when I start to, do my prompts inside of Claude, it kind of knows, how I've programmed it, knows a lot more about the Revit API because it's basing it off of all these individual code files that I've kind of brought in. So in the background here, you can see we're getting this. It's just telling me that the add-in can't be verified. That's okay. We expect
So
that.
I have a question about that. So
Yeah.
in Claude, what you said, this is similar to having a custom GPT, right?
Yep. Mhm.
It may be a different language, but basically you can upload files
Right.
and it's going to use that knowledge. So when you ask a question, it's less likely to hallucinate or just make
Exactly.
bad code
Yes.
because it has a source of information that is private. So that means by default, the Claude users might not get the kind of experience you have since you gave and feed him more
Right. And
knowledge, right?
that's, yeah, exactly. So I've done custom GPTs. I have a custom GPT as well.
Mm-hmm.
I find Claude's interface is a lot sort of user friendly.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've done, so in the Revit Add-in Academy, actually students have access to that custom GPT. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just testing out Claude now, but same thing there that you can get access to this
Yeah.
particular.
Okay, you can share it to
You
other
can
people
share it.
too.
Yeah. Yep.
I see.
So yeah, here is, so I launched Revit up over here. And again, we're just doing this so we can see here is our BIM Pure tools, our ribbon. So when this pulls up, what we'll be able to do is launch our tools. And right now there's nothing, we don't have any code in there that's doing anything meaningful, but we'll be able to see, okay, we have our ribbon, we have our buttons, and then we can, start to build off. And that's what we're going to do right now. So we'll wait for that. It's exceptionally slow today. I don't know why. I think because
meanwhile, I just asked a question in the chat. I did a poll. What language are you using for Revit tools? 79% Python and
interesting.
20% C Sharp.
Okay.
I guess like Python, from what I see, it tends to be kind of a gateway to the world of
absolutely.
Revit API.
Yep.
But people doing kind of a serious, more complex plugin, most of them eventually migrate to C Sharp. That's what I see, at least.
And it's good to know, it's good to know both. Like I'm not great at Python, but I know some. So if I'm working in Dynamo, I'll do that. If I'm going to do an add-in, I'll just use, I'll go straight to C Sharp because I can kind of build out that.
Sure.
I don't need the additional infrastructure.
No.
Okay. So here's our BIM Pure tools. And then these are our buttons right here. And these are just, terrible looking icons, but I could obviously make these a lot better. So right now we have this is all working. Our code is connected right now to Visual Studio. So in fact, if I went into here, I'm in command one, I'm just going to put in, it's called a task dialog. And I'm going to say test dialog.show. We'll say test, and I'm going to say, hello, BIM Pure. Right. So I'm adding that code in. I click here to do what's called a hot reload. It's going to refresh my DLL file. So now when I click on my button one, I am now connected to Visual Studio. So updates that I make happen, and so I can push them straight through. Now we're going to be doing some wholesale changes. So I'm going to close this down. But if I'm making minor tweaks, I can kind of keep Revit and Visual Studio up at the same time. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that line. Now I have a series of prompts that we're going to put in here, and we're going to use that. And again, this is going to be based off of, it's going to be using a lot of my project knowledge. But my first prompt, let's say I want to create a series of kind of text editing tools. So I'm going to ask it to write a C# add-in for Revit that gets text notes in the Revit file, and it changes text to upper class. And then I'm asking it, so use the command add-in template. That's something that I have here as my project knowledge, and output the code for a command add-in. So I'm just going to put that right here. And I like doing this kind of side by side. So that way I have this, I can kind of look at the code first, and I can make sure that there are no hallucinations. There's, everything kind of looks like it should. Claude does this where it creates these artifacts. So you'll see it opens up this little window. So I'm seeing its response here, and then this is the output. So this is the actual code that it's giving me. So I'm not going to grab everything. I'm going to cherry pick a little bit because I know, basically what I need to put into Visual Studio. So I'm going to take that code and let's go full screen. And I know I don't need that stuff, and I'm just going to drop in that code. So I'm not, I'm looking at this, I see, okay, conceptually getting a filtered element collector. So this is actually getting all the text notes in the model. It's starting a transaction, so it's locking the model. And then it has a loop here. So it's looping through all of those text notes, and then it's converting the text here to upper, and then it commits. So it's pretty simple as far as coding goes, but it generated a lot of code that I didn't have to sit there and type. I'm like, okay, so far so good. So that's one tool down. So I'm going to switch over into our command 2, and I'm going to take another prompt here, and let's pull that back up real quick. And now I'm going to say, okay, hey, that looks great. Now write another command addin that converts all the text notes to lowercase. So it's going to crunch on that, and it's going to generate, another series of lines of code here. And it looks very similar. In fact, it's virtually identical, except instead of changing the text to upper, it's changing it to lower. So I can grab that here. And this, again, this isn't super hard stuff, but it's a lot of typing that I'm lazy. I don't want to be doing all that typing, but I can go through and I can understand, okay, that's pretty much how I would program it. It's basing it off of, a lot of my code samples. So that actually works out really well. So, okay, so far so good. So that's 2 tools that we have. Now let's go for a third tool. And what we want to do now, let me see if I can pull this up. We'll put it right there at the bottom. I'm going to say, okay, how about a command addin that converts the text notes to title case? So I want it to capitalize the first letter of every word. I don't know why I would use this, but there may be instances where I need to do this. And there's actually not, there's not a specific method within text notes to be able to do this. So it's actually going to have to create a little bit of code. And you can see it right down here, it created a method to title case, and it's actually, using some C# code specifically to be able to do that. I didn't know that. Like, I don't know, I would have to do a lot of Googling and say, I don't know that sort of off the top of my head, but now I do, because it's actually written that code for me. I'm going to grab pretty much most of this, and then I'm going to drop this into my command 3 right here. And okay, same thing. We're getting all the text notes. We're doing the transaction, kind of basic Revit API type operations. We have a loop. We're going through the text, and then we're converting it to our title case. All right, so that's 3 tools in, I don't know, a few minutes. Let's go for a 4th one. And for this one, we're going to do this one for fun. And this one, what we're going to do, let's say you want to play like a little prank on your colleagues. So we're going to write an addin that reverses the order of each word. So if the text reads as this is text, it's going to reverse the letters for each of those. So I don't recommend you do this. This is sort of anti-productivity types of things, but we're going to generate an addin that will do it. I would never do this because I don't want to have to look up exactly how to do it, but I will definitely have Claude do it for me. And again, it's figuring out what type of C# code it needs to make that kind of string manipulation. A lot of this is very similar to all the other add-ins we've written, except now I have a method here called reverse words, and it's just going to take all those letters and just flips them. So let's put that in here. So that's our 4th tool. Now, where this starts to get kind of interesting is, let's say I want to create a user interface. So I want to create a user interface because, I have these 4 tools and I can click a button for each one, but I don't really I want something that looks pretty good. So I want to just be able to select, not, I want uppercase or lower. I want to have a drop down. So I'm going to put in another prompt here, and I say, I want to create a WPF form. So WPF is a type of technology. It stands for Windows Presentation Framework, and allows me to create user interfaces. And it actually does it using a markup language called XAML. If you've ever done any, if you've done any forms or anything with C#, typically you're going to be working with XAML. And it's kind of a different type of language, but it will create users' forms and controls and buttons and all that. So I'm going to put that in here, and I'm saying what I want you to do is to put a label at the top that says BIM Pure Tools. There's going to be another label that says selects the text note, and then there's going to be a combo box with 4 options. So you can click a drop down. You can choose uppercase, lowercase, title case, whatever you want. So I'm going to plug that in, and what it's going to do, you'll see that the code is going to look a lot different. So it's going to generate this type of code right here. This is in that XAML syntax. So this is, pretty straightforward. It's not a whole lot of code, but it's going to generate it for me. And I don't have to do all that little bits of typing as I go through it. So let me go back up. I want to get that code. Here we go. Here's our form code. So I'm going to basically grab that. And then inside of Visual Studio, I'm going to go ahead. I don't have a window here, but I'm going to add one. And so I'm going to create a window. I'm going to call this text case win. And we're going to add that in. So once I do that, we'll see it here in the project browser. And I'll get like a little bit of a, it has like a WYSIWYG. So I can kind of see what that looks like. So if I split this, here's my window. There's nothing in it yet, but here's the code that generates it. And again, this is like a whole other language that you have to know, when you want to create forms. So I took all of my code. Let me grab that again. Okay, I'm going to copy it. And now I can just go ahead and paste it in right here. And what you'll see what happens is, okay, there's my window. So it created that window for me based on all of this code. So that's not bad. Like all we have, we have an OK button, we have a cancel button. I have my drop down right here. It says BIM Pure, and I have a little note here. That's not bad, right? It looks, it looks like a form. But let's say I want to do it a little bit nicer, right? So I can go back into Claude and I'm going to put in a new prompt. And let me see if I can, here, that way we can see it a little better. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say that looks okay, but we want to jazz it up. And I want the window to look more modern. And this is for BIM Pure. So we're going to do blue. We're going to use some purple and pink. We want a different font for the title.
Yeah, I could share the hex code of
there we go. Exactly. Yeah. So I didn't know the hex code. So I'm just saying blue, pink, and purple. Yeah, but this isn't a very big prompt. I'm just saying this looks good, but can you make it look better? All right. So we're going to put that prompt in there, and it's going to generate kind of another set of this WPF code pretty quickly. And so I can, as this is coming in, and again, now we're starting to get, there's a lot more kind of code that's involved here just to get that, to kind of dress it up. So let me go back to here real quick.
So just a question. For example, my BIM Pure has a branding guide PDF. So could you upload the branding PDF guide to Claude and say, use kind of the branding guidelines?
Really good question. I'd have to test that. I assume yes, but I think you might have to, your prompt might have to be very specific that says, the colors as indicated in, the file name. Yeah, I wonder. That's actually would be really interesting. I'll have to try that. Okay, so I'm going to grab this code. I'm going to come back here. We're going to basically wipe out everything except that top line. Now I paste that in, and that's not too bad. Oh, it did it different. It's funny. When I was testing this earlier, it actually, so each time I do it, it's a little different. I don't like this one quite as much. You can see we have the pink on the border. It gave us, yeah, it looks funny. So I could probably, have it, I could do it, try it again. Yeah, in fact.
Yeah, but so far, I'm surprised that there's not so much back and forth. So when I've tried to do code, like sometimes for my website, I will do JavaScript, for example.
Yep.
And sometimes it kind of works, but not that much. So I will send a screenshot. It gives me other code. I try again. And it's like playing ping pong with the AI until, okay, finally it kind of works. But see, you don't seem to have a lot of that. Is that because of the information you fed the model before?
Yeah, so it's very constrained. So it's really looking at, I have some WPF code in there, and it will pull from outside, but it's prioritizing what I've actually given it. So I just asked it, I said, that looks okay, but can you give me, another take on the colors? So let's just see what this looks like. But what we'll be able to do with this, though, is just very quickly, I can ask it now to generate code so they can launch that form and then kind of connect with what we need. So I'm going to put this in. We have a few minutes, right, Nick?
Oh yeah, well, we can. We'll extend.
Okay,
a bit more.
We're almost there.
This is good. I want to see more of it.
Yeah. So okay. So this is now. Here's our another option. So let's remember this one. oh, that looks worse. It totally got rid of the pink. So, I could go through. I'm going to undo that because I actually liked the other. That's slightly better.
That's fine for today, right?
Yeah, we're good. So again, but it added a lot of setting these things, and like I sort of know how to do this. I might have to Google it. I understand the principles, and that's the important thing, and I know where to put it. So now that we have this done, I have some additional, a little bit of extra code that it gave me that I need to put in. Let me go back, and I like to with Claude because I can go back to these specific artifacts. So this is I'm going to ask for the code behind. Oh, it's not giving it to me. Let's see. Okay, now I'll ask for it again. Show me the.
Yeah. I've got to say that I like the fact that you have to click on a window to see the code. Like on
Yeah,
ChatGPT, it's
it
kind
just
of all,
comes right in.
yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I asked it to show me the code behind, and this is code that kind of sits behind the form. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to paste this into Visual Studio. I think I got, there we go. Okay, yeah. So I'm not getting errors, and Visual Studio would tell me, oh, it did give me some errors. So we'll have to figure out exactly what, we'll fix that as we need to. But it would show me inside of my window here, if I did have an error. So our last step here, what I'm going to ask it to do is I'm going to say, okay, now we have this window, we have this form that we created. Go ahead and generate the code that will make the add-in. So I say, write the code for an add-in that selects all the text notes, converts them to uppercase, lowercase, title case, based on what the user selects in our text case window. So I'm going to put that in. And then this is going to basically give me the code I need to build the add-in. So it's generating that through. I'm going to go into my last command here, command 5, and I'm going to drop this in. And it's going to open that window. It's going to give me sort of some options here, and it's going to do it all very, very quickly. So let's grab that code here. And I'm going to go into command 5. And so that's our last bit of our toolbar. So this, again, I won't go through all the little bits, essentially doing what we did in these previous commands, except in this case, it's opening up the window. And then the user is selecting what option they want. Do they want upper, lower, title? Do they want the reverse case? And then once it does that, it's going to go through, and based on the user selection, it's going to convert the text. So it wrote this method here, convert text. It takes the current text as it's looping through, and then it does that conversion here based on what the user selected. So I'm going to go ahead, and I do see a bunch of, let's see, command 3, get button data. What happened? I'm just going to do some quick. Okay. I see. I did some very quick cut and pasting. So that threw off. I'm going to go through and just do some troubleshooting here to get rid of some of these errors, but we should be able to get them pretty quick.
Yeah, no problems. While you're doing that, I don't know if you can multitask this way, but people are asking if the data that you put into Claude, do you own this data, or can it be used to train their models?
So that's the one thing that I like with Claude is that projects are protected, so that, I mean, as I understand it, they're not using that data to train to train their model. And that's different with ChatGPT. So with custom GPTs, if you have a personal account and you create a custom GPT, that you're not able to segregate that data quite as well. Like Claude is very explicit about where those kind of firewalls are. And that got me nervous, with ChatGPT. I'm like, wait a minute. So I'm uploading all this data that I think is
putting
protected,
all the information from a client, for example,
and
right?
it's leaking.
And it's going to be training it. Yeah.
So I do think that there's going to be some interesting kind of marketing that's going to happen. Like, I don't want my data to leak out. It's proprietary. So I'm going to use this, I'm going to use Claude. I'm not going to use ChatGPT. So, I think there will be some kind of protections and things that come out because of that. All right. So we are almost, let me just wrap this up. As always, you go through it, you do it quick. And then I forgot, this is the one thing with C#, as you can see, there's a lot of curly brackets here. And so that always makes things fun, making sure everything is lined up. And we did a lot of, we're going fast. I think I got, yeah, okay, good. So I got rid of all of my errors. So now what I can do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to build my add-in. So I'm building it specific for Revit 2025. Again, it's going to compile the code into a DLL. It's going to copy that over, and we should be able to test this out pretty quick. So I didn't set my timer. I meant to, but I think, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes to kind of get this up and running. And I didn't really have any code. All I do have, my prompts here. I did take my prompts.
You did write the prompts before.
So I did write the prompts before. So
how long? Yeah, let's show them on screen. So how long does it take to write good prompts like that?
I would say, like when I was going through this, the demo, like when I was, doing it obviously prior to this, it probably took me, I don't know, 45 minutes or so with a little bit of testing back and forth and things like that. So, getting the prompt is important and knowing exactly.
You think it's an art form? I remember when ChatGPT came out, people were like, there's going to be the prompt engineer.
The prompt engineer. Yeah. And you don't hear that.
Yeah. Right? You don't hear it as much. Yeah.
I don't think those prompts are particularly good. Like, I didn't really optimize my prompts. What's interesting though, is going through that, like I thought, oh, it'd be cool if I could get it to write a tool that would actually change all the text in a schedule. I'm like, oh, let me do that. And so I started testing that, and it's like, oh, I should have known this, but schedules are kind of difficult because some of that parameter data is coming from a material or from a room name or from something else. So it's not just like it's regular text. So, I kind of went down a rabbit hole and I had to sort of back my way out, but I didn't have to do a lot of code first in order to get to that point. All right. So we're going to go through, let me take a look at one of these details. And we have some, nope, that has no text notes, of course. So let me see if I can get, all right. So this is a good one. We have a drafting view with some text notes. We can go up to our BIM Pure tools. And I should have done a better job naming these, but we have button one.
Are these text notes or their tags? Oh yeah, they're text.
They're actually, yeah. So yes, they are text notes. Yep. So I can click on that and that's going to go to uppercase. If I want to go here, I can click on that one and it's going to our title case. And then, if we want to, be nasty, we can do our reverse case here. And it basically flipped everything around. Don't do that one.
Good idea to run that just before creating a set of PDFs, right?
Yeah, 100% CDs. Yeah, exactly. And then walk out because you're going to be fired. So we can go back to, let me undo that one. And now we can take a look at our user interface one here. So here's our BIM Pure tools. I can choose these options. So let's say we want to go to lowercase and then I click OK. And then it did that conversion for us. So yes, we had some pre-baked prompts, but we didn't have any pre-existing code. And then we were able to, create sort of iterate through that pretty quickly. And, a lot of that time would have been spent writing code, me sitting there typing, which nobody wants to see. I'd much rather kind of cut and paste it from there. So I want to kind of wrap things up. I appreciate the extra time. And just a few kind of best practices as we wrap up. When if you're starting to think about how to integrate AI, the important thing is, as I said, understand the process. So you want to know how add-ins are created and structured. There are certain things you want to know, like you want to have some familiarity. You don't need to be an expert, but you want to have some familiarity with the Revit API, with C#, how that add-in file gets loaded by Revit, how does Visual Studio work? So those things are important. And again, that approach of use AI to assist, but not replace. So you are going to have to kind of get your hands dirty with some code. So the way going back to our car analogy here, so learn to drive before relying on autopilot. So if you think about, a car with auto drive or even like pilots, like you need to know how to fly a plane before you can turn it on to autopilot. So you need to be able to get the plane down. And those, autopilot's a great tool because it can really makes the process a lot easier, but there is prerequisites. Use a smart assistant. So that's going to be a custom GPT or it's going to be a Claude project. Make sure, those things work really, really well if you've trained them. The trick is to make sure you feed them good code. And like I showed, a lot of that code I get is from this library, Archsmarter Utils. That's a library that I do share. Students in the in the Revit Addin Academy get access to that library as kind of it's a good starting point. So AI too is a great teaching tool. So it can be your mentor. You can learn from the code. You can ask it to describe and sort of add comments to the code so you can better understand that. I had to do that recently where I was working on something that used authentication with Autodesk websites. And it uses this, it's called three-legged authentication, and you're sending all these requests and you're getting tokens. It's kind of confusing, but it was great to be able to, ask, in this case, I asked Claude to sort of write out some code for me and annotate it so I could better understand it. And then
Actually, I was working on we've had a mid course with Eric Fritz, who's more working on the Python side, and the way he recommends using AI. Yeah, you can generate code, but you can also paste code that you see somewhere and ask AI to explain the code,
tell you what
line by line.
Right.
Yeah. So that's it. Because I also remember when I'm not really a coder, but when I look at code, it's like, what's going on? What's this line? What's going on? And you can try to Google, but it doesn't work that well.
And I was doing that in this case. I had Google up, like I had sort of the API documentation, I had Claude, and I had Visual Studio, and I was able to sort of go back and forth and get it to work a lot faster. So another thing too is iterate and experiment. So, refine your AI prompts, kind of go through it and try to figure out what that prompt is. You can actually ask it to, I was doing this, I got it to generate something I wanted. And then I said, what is the prompt? Like, it took some iterations, and I said, give me the prompt that I would need to get this result. And then I'm like, perfect. Okay. So I'll save that into my list of prompts. And that works out well. And then also too, you can look at combining AI tools. So, I use ChatGPT for some things. I use Claude. I think there's going to be other tools. I have GitHub Copilot. I think, there's going to be more and more tools that we can start to use and kind of play with. And then certainly, have fun and be creative. So with all of this, these kind of best practices, if you do want a guide, stay tuned. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about some things that I have upcoming. So I'll segue into that. As I mentioned, I'm going to be at AU next week. I'm doing a talk called Parsing Project Data for Enhanced Decision-Making in the AEC Industry. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's on Thursday in the morning. It'll take a second here. And I'm presenting this with a colleague of mine. We're going to talk about some of the sort of initiatives we've been doing with data and how to use data at IMEG. I just started a podcast last week. So
I saw that in one of the emails.
That's going to be, kind of fun. And so, I've been thinking about it for a while. So my first episode talks specifically about 5 reasons you should learn to code. And, so if you're on the fence, you're not sure if coding's for you, it's a short listen. So I have a QR code here and you can give it a listen. There's links to on my website, which I'll share. And then I'm also doing a Revit add-in workshop. That's going to be on Tuesday, October 22nd. And it figures I had a QR code for that. I don't know why it's not showing up. So that's in a couple weeks time. Looking more specific.
I can add all the links later if you just send me. There's for each episode now I have a blog post where any important link I try to put it in.
That would be great. So that's going to be coming up in a couple of weeks, and we'll be looking more at, I went over very quickly how we structure an add-in. We'll be looking at that a little bit more closely. And then lastly, I run the Revit add-in bootcamp, which is my course for getting people up and started creating Revit add-ins using C# and the Revit API. So that's going to start on November 4th. It's kind of a 12-week guided experience through a whole series of different exercises. And then once that 12 weeks finishes, I have additional advanced courses that you can take inside of that in the bootcamp as well. So in the end, it's sort of, you get 6 months kind of access to the Revit add-in.
And for what level is that for
we start at the
experience, medium?
Yeah.
So let's say that someone who has a little bit of coding experience, is that still a good option?
Yes, it is. So you don't, there's no prerequisite for having C# or anything. I find that people who have some experience with Dynamo actually tend to do well. And that's not saying that people who don't have any experience don't do well, but having a leaning towards kind of a computational mindset. And Dynamo is really good for kind of getting you into that frame of thinking. So that certainly helps, but you don't have to have any programming experience. Literally, we start, what is a string? What is an integer? What is a double, the basics, and we go from there. So, lastly, connect with me again, Michael Kilkelly, michael@archsmarter.com. There is my website, and let's see. Okay, I'll zoom in here. Here are the various QR codes for the podcast, the workshop, and the boot camp. And I did go over, Nick, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So do you want, thanks a lot. That was super interesting. I mean, I have lots of questions, could talk about it for hours, but
I'm happy.
So people still watching live, if you have some questions, now is the time, but I know some of them that I scroll past through. So let's have a look. We have some comment from Cal, who says that with ChatGPT, if it's hosted on
Azure, yep.
Azure, yeah. It's a protected cloud. Your data is owned by you and your company only. So if you're using ChatGPT, I guess enterprise solution to protect your data are possible.
Yeah, there are definitely ways. Yep. And I know like at IMEG, we have our own sort of internal chatbot. And I don't know specifically if it's using ChatGPT. I suspect it is, but it's, it's internal corporate data that we want to make sure it doesn't get out. So it's pretty well protected.
Yeah, let's see. We have from Brendan, any recommendations for those of us that do not know how to code? So that would be the workshop. Is that the best way to get started?
Yeah, that's a good way to get started because we're going to talk about kind of the fundamentals and the basics.
And yeah. Brendan is also asking, is it better to learn yourself or hire a programmer to do it for you? I have limited time to manage projects and learn new tech.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough part is that like you're basically learning an entirely new skill. And so, I mean, I do think personally, I think that it's going to be more and more important as like we start to rely a lot more on tools. So having an understanding of how coding works is really valuable. Like in architecture school, like there's often design build studios. So the point of that is not that you're going to go out and be a contractor, although some people do, but that you kind of know how the pieces fit together. You know what it takes to frame out a window, put up a wall. I think coding is going to be a little bit like that. Like it's important to know how the pieces fit together. You don't have to be a professional coder, but it's good to know, be able to talk the language. So, if you are going to hire somebody, if you at least have an understanding of the fundamentals, it makes it a bit easier to have discussions and conversations. It's not like they're just handing a black box, like here it is. You can converse about it, more sort of meaningfully. So, I mean, that's not, that didn't answer the question about what do you do if you don't have a whole lot of time.
But learning the basics of the general principles of programming the APIs is a good idea regardless.
Actually, for my podcast next week, I have an episode that I'm going to put out about, do you build the tool or do you buy the tool? And it's like, how do you make that calculation on that? That's coming up.
So are these solo episodes, your podcast, or are we going to have guests? Or
I think we'll have guests. Yeah, I'm kind of I'm going to figure out, I'm going to feel it out a little bit. Yeah, for right now, it's solo, but I think I'm going to bring some guests on as well.
A question from Carlo Garcia. Great work, guys. Just 3 questions. Why use WPF over WinForms? Is it easier to start with Revit macros before Revit add-ins? Okay, there's a few questions in there. Let's start with these 2.
So WinForms is an older technology. What is nice about WinForms is it's very much kind of drag and drop. And so I can say like, I need a combo box or text box. I have a palette and I can kind of drag and drop. I ran into issues using using WinForms in that just the way I was trying to configure like a multi-version code file. And so I was trying to configure it so I could build to multiple versions of Revit, but for some reason in Visual Studio, it wouldn't allow me to edit the WinForm. So I would have to like move it into a different solution. I could make my edits and then I'd have to copy it back, which was a real pain. What WPF allows you to do is just do like much richer user interfaces. You have a lot more control, like you can customize everything. There's more of a learning curve for sure. But like once I figured out how it worked and switched over, that's, and I think too within Revit, like most developers are using WPF for Revit add-ins just because it's a lot better. And I do in the Revit Add-in Academy, I actually have a separate course that's just on how to create, user interfaces using WPF. The second question, as far as macros go, that's how I got started. I started creating macros and I had the Archsmarter.
Are macros still a thing?
So what happened with Revit 2025, there was a couple things that happened. One is that they changed the underlying, so they changed the .NET framework. So the API basically got rebuilt on a much more modern .NET technology, which is great. And so there, there were obviously some wrinkles that had to get worked out. But what they also did, and I didn't realize this until I went to convert my macros, is they totally changed the way they worked. So now macros can't be embedded into RVT files, whereas they could previously. And they don't have a built-in macro editor inside of Revit. So you used to be able to use Sharp Develop, and that was inside of Revit. And it was, problematic and buggy, but at least it was there.
So they made it worse. Why?
I mean, it depends. So now you can write macros, but they live on your computer. They're part of your Revit profile. So if you want to share that macro with somebody, like, hey, I made this cool tool, like there's a whole bunch of steps on where you need to copy the code files, and then you need to compile it and build it. So as far as I'm concerned, like they did make it, like the best thing about macros is I could say, like, here's a RVT file that contains my 20 best macros. Go for it. And now you can't.
Do you still use them at all, or it's?
I don't know, and I've actually kind of somebody emailed me about today, like, hey, when are the macros coming out for Revit 2025? And I'm like,
yeah, sorry,
they're not. So
yeah, I don't see many people using them these days.
Yeah,
when I started, it was kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I think that maybe they're going to revamp it even more. They also too, you have to download Visual Studio Code to do your macro editing. It's like at that point, I don't know. I think you might as well just build an add-in. It's a little more of a learning curve, but.
All right. There are a few more questions. You have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, of course.
One from me. What about the GitHub Copilot? Have you tried it? What do you think?
Yeah. So I do use it. I like it. It's a little freaky. So I have it turned on right here, and you can open up, like I can open up a chat window, and I can start asking. I don't typically use it in this capacity, but it's integrated right in here with Visual Studio. But it will, as I start to type, let me see if I can get it. Let's see. Let me create a new text note. Let me see if it will. Sometimes it doesn't now. I was hoping it would pick up. But what it will do, I might have disabled it. It will actually fill out, like it will write a whole line of code for you. And all you have to do is hit tab, and then you can go on to the next. It's kind of freaky the way it works, because as you're writing code, it's going to, line by line almost, it will give you code suggestions. Sometimes it's a bit distracting. And that's why I like using the kind of Claude on a separate window, and then I can look at it, copy and paste it in as I need it. But it's pretty wild because it's using your GitHub repositories as its source. So it's looking at code you've already written.
There was a question earlier, or I think it's a comment, and I don't know anything about it. I'm just a programmer myself. But Addis said, please read solid OOP principles and slap that Sonnerlint extension to VS. You know what Sonnerlint is? Someone who had a comment.
So OOP would be object-oriented programming.
Okay.
And so, you want to make sure, and solid, like there are different, I have books, somewhere over here about just kind of programming conventions and, best practices within programming.
All right, let's see. Are there any more questions that we haven't answered? Last chance, folks. Then I see time flying.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna put that down. Yeah, people were asking about the mind maps tool you were using. So that's called xMind. xMind.ai.
Yeah.
That's the same one as last time, isn't it?
It is. I've been using this for years. And it's unfortunate it has this great pitch mode that I love. And so, but it doesn't really work with images, but I'll switch to it real quick because it just looks really cool. So you can navigate through your mind map in this way. And so it's basically just browsing through all of my topics. And I like it because it's kind of the way my brain thinks, but I can just kind of flip through it very quickly. For whatever reason though, it just doesn't like Zoom, and it won't display the images. Otherwise I would have done the whole presentation like that.
There's like to finish, there's a pretty good question from Nathaniel Rackham. What advice would you have for those out there who are trying to write a digital strategy for the next 5 to 10 years? AI is clearly going to fundamentally change the way we work, but how can we plan ahead? Pretty hard.
Yeah, 5 to 10 years is going to be really tough because, I I think that's going to be really difficult because we don't know where these tools are going to go. I think you can, I think 1 year you would be able to kind of plan that. And I would think looking at ways that you can leverage AI, looking at sort of what the tools that we have now between the LLMs, and as they're starting to integrate more kind of image-based processing, I think we can project that out a few months. Beyond that, like the rate of change is so much. Like I had said, I think earlier that, I'll make an off the cuff estimate like, oh, ChatGPT won't be able to like read a PDF of drawings and, give us information on that. And it can't do that yet, but I'm pretty sure in 6 months it will, and like that technology is advancing very quickly. I can't upload, a Dynamo graph and have it recognize and tell me, what's not working right now, but I think pretty soon it will. So I think there are certain capabilities that we can look at, things like, being able to read images, into AI and actually extract information. That's probably going to, get significantly better within a year or so. Beyond that, like, I don't know, it's really tough.
There's the concept of agents I've heard from. So not only it can
Right.
generate
And
text, but
agents that talk to agents.
it could actually open a file, do
Yep.
things for you inside of these files,
Yeah.
which sounds a bit scary when
So yeah,
said like that. But if done well, it could be a pretty amazing. In fact.
so the OpenAI, ChatGPT, the API has it, you can create assistants, and then those assistants can work on specific files and they can have specific jobs. And so you can start to, link a whole series of agents that can go through, a workflow of some sort, to, produce an end result. Going back to that question, I think it would be interesting to ask ChatGPT or, an LLM, what do you think?
What should be my digital
doing?
strategy?
What should be my, and I don't know what it would come up with, but I think that would be, that's probably where I would start just to see. But I do think 5-10 years is tough. Just again, there's kind of, it feels like at least within AI that there is an acceleration. And I mean, in 5 years, is there going to be, is there going to be Revit? Are we going to instead have, 100 different Revits, or we're going to make our own Revit out of a whole series of parts? I don't know.
Yeah,
Fun to think about though, but
it's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah,
Think about it. Is how long has it been? 2 years since the original ChatGPT?
Yeah, right.
It feels like more than that, right?
It does. Yep. Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't have any.
Okay, no. So let me just mention a couple of things before we close this out. Okay, so Autodesk University, that's starting next week. I'm speaking there. Search my name in the sessions if you are attending. Looking forward to see those of you attending out there. Special thanks to today's sponsor of the live event. It is Guardian, a Revit plugin that helps you maintain your Revit standards and workflows. Check them out at getguardian.tech. And finally, the live masterclasses. So if you like these live events on YouTube, we'll keep doing them, but we also have a few private events for the BIM Pure subscribers. Check them out at bimpure.com/live-masterclasses. You can see 4 upcoming events in the coming months, and you can subscribe to access them all. These are smaller, more intimate events where you can chat directly with the experts. So, okay, back to you, Michael. So as last time, that was fascinating. I could have kept going for more, but we've went beyond the hour.
Yeah.
So it's time to.
I think we're good.
I think we're good. Yeah. So, any final word or mention? I think you were pretty clear with all the links to your events.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting time, and it's going to be, we could do this in another year and it'll be totally different. So,
totally.
I think there's a lot going on. So it's fun. It's definitely
these are a wild time in industry. I like there's AI, but there's so many new startups too. I like checking them out. Seeing what's out there.
Yep.
Okay, so thanks to everyone watching live. Thanks to everyone watching the replay. Thanks to Michael. Thanks to Guardian. And see you. So the next episode of BIM Pure Live is going to be at the end of the month. I'm going to announce later on. So meanwhile, see you everyone. Bye.
See ya.